The twin suns of Carcel hung low over the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the open trade bazaar. The air smelled of hot metal, strange spices, and old dust. Merchants shouted prices in dozens of languages, creatures of every size, and shape moved through the crowd, each one busy with buying or selling something. In the center of the bazaar stood a raised platform. On it, several aliens waited in a line, each wearing a metal collar that marked them as property for sale. Some had bright scales that shimmered under the suns. Others had extra arms or eyes that flicked nervously toward the crowd. At the far end of the line stood Nira. She was small compared to the others, with pale green skin and a thin crest running from her forehead to the back of her head. The crest was damaged. A jagged crack ran through its center. It looked as if it had once glowed with light, but now gave off no shine at all. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she kept her eyes down. A fat merchant in a long purple robe called out her details in a loud voice. "Valari female, 15 seasons old, crest damaged, cannot weave energy threads. Price, 100 credits. A few people glanced at her and then turned away. No one seemed interested. For the Valari species, the crest was everything. It allowed them to sense and shape energy in ways no machine could. A Valari without a working crest was seen as useless. Mark, a human trader, pushed his way through the crowd. His boots kicked up dust as he passed stalls filled with shining tools, strange fruit, and crates of machine parts. He had come to Carcel for one reason, to find spare parts for his old cargo ship, the Silver Dawn. He had no time or credits to waste on anything else. Still, as he walked past the platform, his eyes caught the quiet figure at the end of the line. She was different from the others. The other aliens shifted nervously or stared back at the crowd with defiance. She stood perfectly still, her posture calm but not proud. Her eyes, when they lifted for a brief moment, were deep and steady, like she was looking past the market into some faraway place. The fat merchant noticed Mark looking. "Human captain," he said, waddling closer. "You have an eye for bargains." "Yes, this one is cheap. Only 100 credits," Mark frowned. "What's wrong with her?" The merchant gave a sharp laugh. "Wrong? Everything. Her crest is broken. She cannot do what her kind are meant to do. No power shaping, no energy weaving. She eats, she sleeps, she takes space. Worthless for work. That is why I sell her for almost nothing." Mark glanced back at Nira. She did not move or speak, but there was no fear in her expression. She looked like someone who had already heard these words many times and no longer reacted to them. "Why hasn't anyone bought her?" Mark asked. "No one wants a broken Valari," the merchant replied, shaking his head. "Even for cleaning work, there are stronger species. This one is a bad investment. You could buy her for the price of scrap metal." Mark was about to turn away, but something in him resisted. He was not sure why. He had no crew besides the old ship's autopilot. He had no need for more mouths to feed. Yet the thought of leaving her here, standing alone while the crowd passed her by, felt wrong. He stepped closer to the platform. "What is your name?" he asked her. She lifted her head slightly. Her voice was soft but clear. "Nira." There was no pleading in her tone, no hope that he would buy her. It was simply an answer, spoken with quiet dignity. Mark hesitated, then reached into the pouch on his belt. He counted out the credits. The merchant's eyes lit up with surprise and greed. "You want her? Good. Take her now." "No refunds," the merchant said quickly. A moment later, the metal collar was unlocked from Nira's neck. The merchant shoved a small control tag into Mark's hand and waved them away. Nira stepped down from the platform and stood beside Mark. She did not thank him or ask questions. She simply waited, as if she were prepared to follow wherever he went. They walked together through the market. The noise of traders calling out prices filled the air. Mark glanced at her from the corner of his eye. "You ever been off Carcel before?" he asked. She shook her head once. Ever worked on a ship? No, she said. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. Well, you're going to learn. My ship isn't fancy, but it keeps moving. If you work, you'll eat. Deal? She nodded again. As they left the bazaar, the crowd thinned. The open landing yard stretched before them, filled with ships of every shape, sleek silver cruisers, bulky freighters, and rusty old haulers. At the far edge, the Silver Dawn waited. She was a patched-up cargo vessel with faded paint and an engine that coughed when it started, but Mark loved her all the same. When they reached the ramp, Neera stopped and stared up at the ship. Her eyes seemed to search its lines, tracing the shape of the hull as if memorizing it. "It is alive," she murmured. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Alive? It's just a ship." She tilted her head slightly, as if hearing something he could not. "It has a voice. It is quiet, but it speaks." Mark had no idea what she meant, but he did not argue. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you your quarters." Inside, the ship's corridors were narrow, lit by old wall panels that hummed softly. Mark led her to a small cabin near the back. It had a narrow bunk, a storage locker, and nothing else. "It's not much, but it's yours now," he said. Neera stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bunk. She touched the wall gently, her fingers running over the cold metal. Mark left her there and went to the cockpit. He sat in the pilot's chair and stared out at the landing yard. He was still not sure why he had bought her. He told himself it was because she had cost almost nothing. But deep down he knew there was more to it. Something about her calm eyes. And quiet strength had caught his attention. As the suns dipped lower, the Silver Dawn prepared to lift off. In the small cabin, Neera closed her eyes and listened. To her, the hum of the ship's systems was not noise. It was music, faint and distant, but real. She felt the ship's heartbeat and smiled to herself for the first time in many cycles. The Silver Dawn lifted off from the dusty landing yard, its old engines groaning before settling into a steady hum. The twin suns of Carcel grew smaller in the rear viewport as the ship climbed into the dark sky. Inside the cockpit, Mark adjusted the controls with practiced hands. In the small cabin, Neera sat on the narrow bunk with her hands resting in her lap. The gentle vibration of the ship's engines moved through the walls, and she listened carefully, her eyes half closed. To her, the hum was not just mechanical noise. It carried rhythm and tone, like the breathing of some great creature. Mark walked down the corridor and stopped at her door. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you around." She followed him without a word. The corridors of the Silver Dawn were narrow and plain. The walls were lined with storage compartments and old maintenance panels. Mark led her past the galley, a small room with a table fixed to the floor and 2 chairs. The shelves held sealed food packs and bottles of water. "This is where we eat," he said. "I don't cook much. Most of the time it's just heat and eat meals. They're not great, but they'll keep you alive." Neera nodded once. She took in every detail, her eyes moving quickly from one object to another. Next, they stopped at the engine room. The large power core sat in the middle, surrounded by cables, coolant pipes, and tool racks. The air smelled faintly of oil and warm metal. "This is the heart of the ship," Mark said. "Don't touch anything in here unless I tell you. The core is old, but still works. If it fails, we're stuck." Neera stepped closer to the core, her gaze fixed on its surface. "It sings," she said softly. Mark frowned. "It what?" "It sings," she repeated. "The sound is low, but steady, like it is telling the ship to move." Mark gave a small shrug. "If you say so." He had heard people talk to their ships before, but never in that way. They moved on to the cockpit. Mark slid into the pilot's seat while Neera stood behind him, her hands resting lightly on the back of the chair. The viewport showed a sea of black space scattered with bright stars. The ship's navigation screen glowed with lines and markers. "This is where I fly and set our course," Mark explained. "Right now, we're headed to the Corin Belt. I need to pick up a shipment there. You can stay in your cabin during trips, or help me keep watch." "What do you want me to do?" Nira asked. "For now, just learn the ship," Mark said. "Pay attention to how things work. If you see something wrong, tell me, even if it's small." She nodded again. Later, in the galley, Mark set 2 food packs on the table. He heated them in the wall unit and handed one to her. She opened it carefully and ate in silence. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as though she was still getting used to the idea of having a meal that was hers. Mark watched her for a moment. "You're quiet," he said. "I listen," she replied simply. "To what?" "To everything. The ship. The air. You." Mark raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. When they finished eating, he stood up. "You can rest now. We've got a few hours before we reach the belt." She returned to her cabin, but instead of lying down, she sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed. She let the vibrations of the ship flow through her. The hum of the power core and the faint pulse of the shield generators blended into a pattern she could almost see in her mind. Meanwhile, Mark sat in the cockpit going over the ship's systems. He kept thinking about what the merchant had said, that Nira was worthless. But when he had looked into her eyes at the market, he had not seen weakness. He had seen something steady, like the still point in the center of a storm. He told himself he had bought her because the price was low. Yet, deep inside, he felt there was another reason. The next morning cycle, Mark found her in the engine room. She stood in front of the power core, her hands hovering just above its surface without touching it. "What are you doing?" he asked. She turned her head slightly toward him. "It is tired." Mark blinked. "The core?" "Yes. One of the energy channels is blocked. It slows the flow and makes the whole system strain." Mark walked over to the diagnostics panel and checked the readings. To his surprise, one of the energy conduits did show a slight imbalance. Nothing critical yet, but enough to cause stress on the system over time. "How did you know that?" he asked. "I felt it," she said simply. Mark stared at her for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "Maybe you're not as broken as they say." She didn't respond, but there was a faint light in her eyes. They spent the next hour working together. Mark handled the tools while Nira guided him, telling him which connections needed to be adjusted. When they finished, the hum of the core sounded smoother, even to Mark's untrained ear. As they stepped out of the engine room, the ship's comm system crackled. A warning light flashed on the control panel. Mark hurried to the cockpit. The navigation screen showed a red marker ahead. "Asteroid drift," he muttered. "We'll have to change course." But before he could enter the new path, Nira pointed at the screen. "Go here," she said, indicating a narrow gap between 2 large rocks. "That's too tight," Mark said. "The currents will carry us through," she replied. Mark hesitated, then trusted her instinct. He adjusted the controls and guided the ship toward the gap. The asteroids spun slowly, their jagged edges catching the light of a distant sun. Just as they entered the passage, a wave of debris swept past behind them, right where they would have been if they had taken the longer route. Mark exhaled. That was close. Nira looked out at the stars, her expression calm. "The ship told me where to go," she said. Mark didn't know if she meant it literally or not, but he was starting to think the broken Valari girl might have more value than anyone realized. The silver dawn drifted through the silent darkness of space. In the cockpit, Mark sat in the pilot's seat, reviewing the cargo list on the screen. The trip to the Corin Belt had gone smoothly so far, and they were on schedule to arrive within the next few hours. In the engine room, Nira stood in front of the power core again. She had been visiting the core every day since they left Carsel, listening to its steady hum. She said little to Mark about what she did there, but he had noticed the ship seemed to run smoother lately. The engine's stutter was gone, and the lights no longer flickered during long jumps. Mark stepped into the room holding a small toolkit. "We need to check the backup systems before we reach the belt," he said. "Those mining stations don't have the best conditions. If the power fails, we need to be ready." Nira turned to him and nodded. "I will help." They worked together in silence for a while. Mark tightened loose connections while Nira moved around the room, inspecting each section with a calm focus. Her fingers brushed lightly over the conduits, as if feeling something beneath the surface. Suddenly, a faint alarm sounded from the wall panel. Mark frowned and moved quickly to check the display. "That's odd," he said. "The power levels just dropped by 5%. Nira tilted her head. "One of the flow lines is blocked again." Mark blinked at her. "You can feel that from here?" She nodded once. "The energy is trying to move but is forced into a slower path. It creates a strain." Mark looked at the panel again. The diagnostics showed a small blockage in the main conduit leading to the navigation systems. It wasn't serious yet, but if left alone, it could cause problems during their approach to the belt. "I'll have to shut down the core to fix it," he said. "No," Nira replied quickly. "I can fix it while it runs." Mark raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous. You could get hurt." She stepped closer to the core and placed her hands on the metal casing. "I will not be hurt. I can guide the energy away from the blocked path while you open it." Mark hesitated. He had never seen anyone work with a live power core by touch, but there was a quiet confidence in her voice that made him trust her. "All right," he said finally, "if you're sure." He opened the access panel while Nira closed her eyes. Her damaged crest caught the faint glow of the core's light. Slowly, she began to move her hands in small motions, as if shaping something invisible. Mark felt the air shift. The hum of the core changed slightly, becoming steadier. The readings on the panel showed the energy flow diverting smoothly around the blocked section. "That's amazing," he muttered. With the pressure off the blocked line, Mark carefully removed the buildup inside the conduit. Once it was clear, Nira guided the energy back into its normal path. The power level on the display returned to full strength. She opened her eyes and stepped back. "It is fixed," she said simply. Mark closed the panel and studied her. "You're not broken, Nira. Not even close." She looked down at her hands. "The others could shape energy much better than me. I was slower, less precise." Mark shook his head. "Maybe. But you just kept this ship running without shutting it down. I've seen trained engineers who couldn't do that." Her lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. The rest of the day passed quietly until the ship's long-range sensors detected a signal. Mark frowned at the screen. "That's strange. There's a distress beacon ahead." They followed the signal and soon came across a small mining shuttle drifting in open space. Its hull was scorched, and one of its engines hung loose. Mark hailed the shuttle. "This is the cargo vessel Silver Dawn. Do you need assistance?" A tired voice crackled through the comm. "We were hit by a debris storm. Our systems are failing. We need a tow to the nearest station." Mark guided the Silver Dawn close and locked the shuttle into a magnetic tow. Nira stood in the cockpit beside him, watching as the damaged craft slowly moved behind them. Halfway to the station, the Silver Dawn shuddered. Warning lights flashed on the control panel. "Shield generator failure," Mark muttered. "Something must have hit us during the tow. Without the shields, they were vulnerable to any stray debris." Mark started to adjust the controls to slow down, but Nira stepped forward. "Let me try," she said. "Nira, the generator's offline. We need to—" But she was already moving toward the engine room. Mark followed, unsure if she understood the danger. She placed both hands on the shield conduit and closed her eyes again. Her breathing slowed, and the faint crack in her crest seemed to catch the light. Mark watched the readings on the wall panel. The shield's energy output began to climb, even though the generator was still marked as inactive. "How are you doing?" "That?" he asked, unable to hide his astonishment. "I am using the ship's own power flow," she said without opening her eyes. "The shields are weak, but they will hold until we reach the station." Mark stared at her. This was more than just sensing energy. She was shaping it, guiding it directly into the shield network. An hour later, they reached the mining station safely. The shuttle crew thanked them before being taken away for repairs. As the Silver. Dawn prepared to leave, Mark looked at Nira. "You saved us back there. Without those shields, we could have been hit by the same debris that got them." Nira lowered her gaze. "I only did what I could." Mark leaned against the wall. "You know, for someone they called broken, you're starting to look like the most valuable person on this ship." For a moment, her expression softened. Then she turned toward her cabin, leaving Mark alone in the corridor with the growing thought that maybe finding her on Carsel had not been luck at all. The Silver Dawn left the mining station with a full cargo hold and a steady course toward the next delivery point. Mark sat in the pilot's seat checking the trade route map. It was a long trip through a quiet sector, far from most patrols. That made it faster but also riskier. Nira stood near the viewport, her eyes fixed on the stars. She had been quiet all morning, her mind somewhere far away. Mark glanced at her. "You look like you're thinking about something." "There is movement ahead," she said. Mark checked the sensors. The screen showed nothing but empty space. "I don't see anything." She shook her head slightly. "Not yet. But it is there." Mark had learned to take her instincts seriously. Still, there was nothing on the display, so he kept the ship on course. An hour later, the sensors finally beeped. A cluster of red dots appeared on the screen. Mark's jaw tightened. Pirates! The dots closed in quickly. Soon, the main viewport showed 3 ships, small, fast, and armed. They formed a triangle around the Silver Dawn, blocking all escape paths. A deep voice came through the comm system. "Cargo vessel, cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. No harm will come to you if you cooperate," Mark muttered under his breath. That's what they always say. He looked at the shield levels. 60%. Not good enough for a fight. The pirate ships moved closer. Energy weapons charged on their hulls, glowing a threatening red. Mark activated the comm. "This is Captain Mark of the Silver Dawn. We're carrying basic trade goods. Nothing worth stealing." The voice on the other side laughed. "We'll be the judge of that. Power down now." Mark's fingers hovered over the controls. With shields this weak, a fight would be suicide. He glanced at Nira. "If they hit us, we're done." She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the nearest pirate ship. "I can hold the shields?" "They'll overload in minutes," Mark said. "Not if I guide them," she replied. "Trust me." Mark didn't know if trusting her in this situation was smart or reckless, but he nodded. "Do it." Nira ran to the engine room. She placed her hands on the shield conduit, her eyes closing in deep focus. The hum of the Silver Dawn systems changed, becoming sharper and faster. In the cockpit, Mark saw the shield levels climb. 70%, 80, then 90. The pirates opened fire. Bright beams of energy slammed into the ship, but instead of failing, the shields flared bright blue, holding steady. Mark grinned. "All right then, let's see if we can run." He pushed the engines to full power. The Silver Dawn surged forward, breaking through the pirates' formation. The enemy ships followed, firing again and again. Each blast made the ship shudder, but the shields held strong under Nira's control. In the engine room, sweat formed on her brow. She guided the energy in smooth, controlled waves, making sure no single section of the shields took too much stress. One pirate ship tried to cut them off. Mark spun the Silver Dawn sharply, slipping past the attacker and heading toward a nearby asteroid cluster. "Nira, can you handle a fast shield shift?" Mark called through the comm. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Good. I'm going to thread us through those rocks." I need the shield's focused front and port side. In seconds, the shield's strength shifted exactly as he needed. The ship entered the asteroid field, weaving between massive spinning stones. The pirates followed, but their larger weapons were harder to aim in such tight space. Mark's eyes darted between the viewport and the navigation screen. We're almost there. Just a few more turns. Behind them, one pirate ship clipped an asteroid and spun out of control. Another's weapons went silent, likely damaged by debris. Only one ship kept up the chase. Mark saw an opening ahead, a narrow gap between two huge asteroids. "Nira, all shields forward!" The Silver Dawn shot through the gap just as the last pirate fired. The beam hit the shields and scattered harmlessly, absorbed by the energy Nira pushed to the front. The pirate ship tried to follow, but hesitated at the tight space. That was all the time Mark needed. He hit the jump drive. Stars stretched into lines, and the Silver Dawn leapt into hyperspace. The danger vanished into the empty silence of faster-than-light travel. Mark let out a long breath and eased the controls. "We're clear!" Nira walked into the cockpit a moment later. Her steps were steady, but her face was pale. "The shields are tired now. They need to rest." Mark gave a short laugh. "So do I. You just kept us alive back there. I don't know how you did it." She looked out at the swirling blue tunnel of hyperspace. "I listened to the ship and let it tell me where the strength was needed." Mark leaned back in his chair. "Remind me never to doubt you again." She glanced at him, and for the first time since he had met her, there was a small spark of pride in her eyes. The rest of the journey was quiet. The Silver Dawn's shields slowly returned to normal, and Mark found himself thinking about what had happened. Nira had not only reacted fast, she had kept the shields running beyond what the ship's systems should have allowed. It was no accident. She had real skill, maybe even more than the best engineers he had worked with. As the jump timer counted down to their exit point, Mark looked at her. "Nira, I think it's time you stopped thinking of yourself as broken." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the stars. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but certain. "Maybe one day." The Silver Dawn glided through the quiet stretch of space between star systems. The ship hummed gently, the vibrations running through the walls like a pulse. Mark had been monitoring the navigation panels for hours, but his mind kept drifting, back to Nira. She had been unusually quiet since the pirate encounter. She spent most of her time in the engine room, listening to the ship, or sitting in her cabin, staring at the viewport. Mark wondered what she was thinking. Finally, he decided to ask. He knocked lightly on her cabin door. "Nira, can I come in?" "Enter," she said softly. Mark stepped inside. The small cabin smelled faintly of the ship's metal and recycled air. Nira sat cross-legged on the bunk, her hands resting on her knees. She did not look up at him immediately. "You've been quiet?" he said. "I don't mean to pry, but you've been through a lot, haven't you?" Nira's eyes flicked to him, then back to the viewport. "I was not always alone," she said. Mark sat on the small chair beside her. "What do you mean?" "I had a family and teachers on my homeworld," she began. "My people, the Valari, value the crest above everything. It allows us to weave energy. It is our purpose and our honor. From a young age, I trained to control it. I practiced every cycle, hoping to be skilled like the others." Her hands tightened slightly in her lap. "But I failed the test. I was slower than the others. My weaving was uneven. My crest. It cracked during the final trial. They said I was a burden. I could not keep up. I was cast out." Mark frowned. "They abandoned you because of an accident?" She nodded. "I did not hurt anyone. I did not harm the core. But they did not care. They called me broken. I begged for another chance, but they would not listen." Mark leaned back and studied her. The thought made his blood boil. That is unfair. You survived. You kept going. That counts for more than any test they could give you. Neera's gaze shifted slightly. It was lonely. Every day I wondered if I would ever matter to anyone. I learned to hide my feelings. To survive, I did what they expected, and when I could no longer stay, I left. Then you came here, Mark said. To Carsel? Yes, she replied. I wandered, hoping to find work. I thought maybe someone would give me a chance, but everyone saw only the broken crest. Mark shook his head. And I bought you for 100 credits. Seems like the universe had a better plan. She tilted her head. Perhaps. Or perhaps the universe only gave me a chance I still have to prove I am worthy. Mark smiled. You've already proven it. Back with the pirates, with the power. Core, you saved us. Neera looked down at her hands. I did what I could. I am not skilled like others of my kind. I only listen and guide. You guide like no one else, Mark said. You don't just move energy. You understand it. You can feel the ship, the shields, the currents of space. That's something rare, something powerful. For a moment, silence fell between them. Neera stared at the viewport, the distant stars reflected in her eyes. Mark could see a spark of pride forming, a light she had hidden for many cycles. You have talent, he said finally, and you are not broken. You are different, and different is valuable. It always has been. Neera turned to him slowly. I have never been told such words before, she said quietly. Then hear them now, Mark said. You are strong. You are skilled. You are worth more than anyone on Carsel ever realized. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She had carried so many cycles of doubt and pain, and hearing those words was like a small release of a heavy weight. Mark stood. I don't want you to just follow me because you have to. I want you to stay because you know your value, because you can see it in yourself. Neera nodded slowly. I will try, she said. Mark paused at the door. Good, because soon we will need all your skill. There are contracts ahead that will test us. Not just the ship, not just me, but you too. She watched him leave and then turned back to the viewport. Her mind was no longer filled with doubt. Instead, it buzzed with possibility. She could feel the ship's energy flowing around her, steady and strong. She was no longer just surviving. She was learning her place, her power, and her purpose. That evening, Mark returned to the cockpit to find Neera standing at the controls. I was studying the navigation systems, she said simply. He smiled. Good. You're learning fast. She tilted her head, her gaze steady. I want to be ready. Whatever comes next, I do not want to fail again. Mark nodded. You won't, and I will make sure you don't have to face it alone. As the silver dawn moved steadily through the stars, Neera allowed herself a small smile. She had faced rejection, loneliness, and doubt. She had been cast out by her own people. But now, with a human who saw her true worth, she felt something she had never known before. Hope, and hope she realized could be stronger than fear. The Silver Dawn left the quiet sector behind, heading toward the colony on Ilyara 7. The planet's sensors had detected a critical energy shortage, and the colony relied on the delivery of new power modules to survive. Mark studied the navigation map carefully. The fastest route would take them through the Valren Nebula, a dangerous region of space filled with ion storms and debris. We have to go through the nebula, Mark said to Neera, who stood beside him in the cockpit. It's risky, but if we take the long route, the colony will run out of power before we arrive. Neera nodded, her hands resting lightly on the railing. I can feel the currents of the storm, she said. We can move through safely if we listen and guide the ship. Mark glanced at her. You sure about that? Last time we trusted instincts, we almost ran into pirates. I am sure, she replied calmly. The storm is different. I can sense where it is strong and where it is weak. Mark shook his head in disbelief, but he trusted her judgment. All right. Prepare the ship for turbulence. Keep shields focused. And engines steady. The Silver Dawn entered the nebula, and immediately the ship shuddered. Bright flashes of ion energy lit the cockpit, and sensors beeped warning signals. Mark's hands moved quickly over the controls, adjusting the engines, to compensate for sudden gusts of energy. Focus on the core and shields, Neera said softly. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on the ship's conduit panels. Her fingers traced invisible paths, shaping the energy that surged through the vessel. Mark watched in awe. The shields that had been flickering weakly stabilized under her. Touch. The engines, which had begun to strain against the storm, found steady rhythm. Every warning light dimmed, as if obeying her commands. You're incredible, Mark muttered. Neera did not respond. She was focused on the energy, feeling every pulse of the storm. The ship moved through the nebula as if it had a mind of its own, guided by her instinct and understanding. Suddenly, a massive ion bolt struck near the ship, throwing it off course. Mark struggled to correct the trajectory, but the ship's movement was too violent. Now, Neera said calmly. She touched the main power core and redirected the energy surges toward the outer shields. The ship shivered, then steadied. Mark's hands flew over the controls, and the Silver Dawn regained its path. The storm lasted for cycles. The stars outside were hidden by bright, swirling clouds of charged particles. Every few moments, another bolt struck nearby. Yet under Neera's guidance, the ship continued without major damage. Mark could feel the tension in her, the concentration that held the ship together. Finally, the nebula began to thin. The violent gusts lessened, and the bright flashes faded. The Silver Dawn emerged into clear space. Mark let out a long breath. We made it, he said. I don't know how you did that, Neera, but we made it. She opened her eyes and looked at him. The ship told me where the danger was, she said. I only guided it where it needed to go. You guided it better than any autopilot, Mark said, smiling. You're more than just skilled. You're extraordinary. Neera said nothing, but a small smile touched her lips. For the first time, she felt proud of her abilities instead of ashamed of her broken crest. The colony appeared on the sensors ahead, a small ring of buildings nestled in a valley. Energy readings were dangerously low, and the population depended on the modules they carried. Mark carefully maneuvered the ship into the landing bay. The cargo hold doors opened, and Neera helped secure the modules. The colonists watched them with hopeful eyes, whispering among themselves about the humans and the Valari who had braved the nebula. When all the modules were delivered and connected to the colony's energy grid, the lights on the buildings flickered, then glowed steadily. The hum of machinery filled the air. People cheered, and children ran through the streets with joy. Mark looked at Neera. You see that? He asked. You just saved a whole colony. Thousands of lives depend on what you did today. She looked at the lit-up colony and nodded quietly. It is good, she said softly. They have light again. A group of colonists approached them, bowing slightly in respect. One of them, an older woman, spoke. We heard about your ship coming through the storm. You guided it with courage and skill. We owe you our thanks. Mark smiled and patted Neera on the shoulder. I couldn't have done it without her, he said proudly. The woman looked at Neera, her eyes wide. And who is this? You are not. Just human, are you? Neera shook her head. I am Valari. My name is Neera. The woman's gaze softened. You have a rare gift, Neera. Do not hide it. Use it for good, and you will always be valued. Neera felt warmth in her chest. For the first time, she realized that her so-called broken crest did not make her weak. It made her unique. Her abilities had saved lives and people recognized it. Mark led Nira back to the Silver Dawn after the colonists thanked them. "You did amazing today," he said. "I knew you had skill, but that was beyond anything I expected." Nira looked out at the stars, her eyes shining. "I only did what I could. The ship helped too." "Maybe," Mark said with a grin, "but you are the one who guided it. You saw what no one else could see. That is your power." She nodded slowly, accepting his words. For the first time, in many cycles, she felt truly confident in herself. As they prepared to leave the planet, Mark looked at Nira again. "You know, the universe has a funny way of showing who matters. The merchants called you broken, but out here, you're more valuable than most people realize." Nira's eyes met his. "Perhaps being broken was only their opinion. It does not define me." Mark smiled. "Exactly. You define yourself. And today, you defined greatness." The Silver Dawn lifted off from Ilyara 7, carrying its cargo and its crew into the unknown reaches of space. Nira stood at the viewport, watching the colony shrink behind them. She no longer felt like a discarded girl from Carsel. She felt strong, capable, and ready for the challenges ahead. And Mark knew, without a doubt, that he had found not just a companion for his journeys, but someone who could change the course of events in ways he could never have imagined. The Silver Dawn drifted in the calm expanse of space, stars scattered like diamonds on black silk. Nira stood at the viewport, her hands lightly resting on the rail. After the successful delivery to Ilyara 7, she felt a sense of accomplishment she had never known before. For the first time, she truly understood that her value was not defined by others' opinions. Mark entered the cockpit, carrying the ship's latest cargo manifest. "We've got a new contract," he said, smiling. "A wealthy trade convoy. Needs escort through the Tarlon Expanse. It's known for pirate activity. Thought it might be a good test for both of us." Nira turned, her eyes steady. "I am ready," Mark nodded. "Good, because this one will be challenging. Not just the storms, not just the ships. The convoy itself needs careful navigation. You will need to guide the shields, engines, and sensors simultaneously." She stepped closer to the control panels. "I can manage it. I will not let the convoy fail." Mark studied her for a moment. The quiet confidence in her voice impressed him. She had grown from the timid, cautious girl he had first purchased into a skilled, decisive operator. The next cycle, the Silver Dawn departed toward the Tarlon Expanse. As they entered the region, the sensors immediately picked up multiple small craft moving at high speed, pirates. Mark activated the shields and engines while Nira placed her hands on the conduit panels, her focus absolute. The pirate ships closed in from multiple directions, forming a net around the convoy. Mark guided the Silver Dawn through the gaps, while Nira controlled the energy flow to the shields. Every time a blast hit, she shifted the power instantly, preventing damage. Mark could barely believe what he saw. "Nira, the shields!" he shouted. "They're holding!" "Yes," she replied, calm and focused. "I will keep them steady." The pirates fired repeatedly, but their attacks had no effect. Nira anticipated each strike, shifting the energy with speed and precision that made the ship almost untouchable. She even guided the convoy vessels, sending small pulses of power to stabilize their shields when the larger blasts threatened them. Mark realized, with growing awe, that Nira was not just keeping the Silver Dawn safe, she was saving the entire convoy. After long cycles of maneuvering, the pirate ships, frustrated by the convoy's defense, finally retreated. The ships that survived fled into the darkness, leaving the convoy unscathed. Mark exhaled, leaning back in his seat. "You did it. All of it. You saved them." Nira looked at him. "I only did what was necessary." Mark shook his head. No, you did more than necessary. You guided the ship and the convoy like a master. That is skill and courage combined. You should be proud." For the first time, a true smile appeared on her face. She had spent cycles believing herself worthless, but now the truth was undeniable. She was skilled, capable, and valuable. When the convoy reached safe space, the lead commander contacted the Silver Dawn. "We do not know how to thank you," the voice said. "Your Valari companion displayed abilities unlike anything we have seen. The entire convoy owes its safety to her. She is a hero." Nira remained quiet, but a soft blush colored her face. Mark leaned beside her. "See? People can recognize your worth even when the universe tried to hide it from you." She looked out at the stars, thinking of Carcel and the merchants who had labeled her broken. She no longer felt shame. She had been judged by others, but now her actions proved her true value. The convoy commander continued, "We would like to offer you a position as an advisor and navigator for our trade routes. Your skills are rare, and your courage is unmatched. Consider it a permanent place where your abilities will be respected." Nira turned to Mark, unsure. I have never been offered such a thing before." Mark smiled warmly. "You earned it, Nira. They are offering it because of you, not because of anything else. You can choose, but know this. You belong somewhere that values you." Nira thought carefully. She had always lived in fear of rejection, but now she realized she could step into a new life, one where her talents were appreciated. Slowly, she nodded. "I will accept. Not for myself alone, but so I can help others and guide them safely." Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's the Nira I always knew you could become. Brave, skilled, and strong." As the Silver Dawn departed the convoy's orbit, Nira stood at the viewport, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. The stars stretched endlessly, and she no longer felt small or broken. She was capable of great things. She had been tested in storms against pirates and in the challenge of guiding ships through deadly paths. She had survived and excelled. Later, in the quiet of the cabin, Nira sat with her hands resting in her lap. She thought of her home world, of the Valari who had cast her aside. She no longer carried their words as a weight. She had proven herself not just to others, but to herself. Mark knocked lightly on the cabin door. "Ready to rest?" he asked. Nira looked at him and nodded. "Yes, but I will not stop learning. There is still much to do, and I will be ready for it." Mark smiled. "Good. Tomorrow we plan the next route. But tonight you rest. You deserve it." As Nira lay down, she let her eyes drift closed, feeling the vibrations of the silver dawn around her. She listened to the hum of the engines, the steady flow of energy, and she realized something powerful. Her broken crest had never defined her. Her actions, her courage, and her understanding of the universe's energy defined her. She was strong, valued, and important. And for the first time, she felt completely at home in the galaxy. The stars outside sparkled, and the ship moved steadily onward. Mark watched her for a moment, proud of how far she had come. She had faced rejection, danger, and doubt, but she had risen above it all. The galaxy had labeled her broken, but the universe had shown her true worth. Nira opened her eyes, one last time before sleep, smiling softly. She knew her journey had only just begun. There would be more challenges ahead, more storms to navigate, and more lives to protect. But she also knew one unchanging truth. She was not broken. She was powerful, capable, and truly valued, and that truth would guide her in every path she chose. The Silver Dawn sailed onward, carrying its crew toward new adventures, new challenges, and new possibilities. And among them, Nera, once called. Broken, now shone as a beacon of courage, skill, and hope.